75% of our food crops and nearly 90% of wild flowering plants depend to varying extent on animal pollination. A high diversity of wild pollinators is critical to pollination, even when managed bees are present in high numbers. Largely well known, bumblebees are good representatives of wild pollinators. Through helping bumblebees, a lot of wild pollinators will ultimately benefit. This in turn will be of benefit to ourselves. Bumblebees are effective pollinators, making them highly important in food production, especially here in the cold Northern Europe. In addition to being among the most important pollinators of wild berries such as lingonberries and raspberries, bumblebees are also the main species which pollinate blueberries, and all tomatoes in greenhouses are pollinated by bumblebees as honeybees are not suited for this job. Bumblebees are a common pollinator in the Northern Hemisphere. There are around 250 species around the world, of which Norway has 35, Finland 37, Sweden 38, Denmark 29, and Estonia has 28. This means that the Nordic-Baltic countries have around 14.5% of all bumblebee species. In comparison, we have about 1% of the world's bee population. There are two main groups of bumblebees, the ones with a short tongue and those with a long tongue. Short-tongued bumblebees are important pollinators of plants with short nectaries and easy access to nectars, such as dandelions, white clover, and field scabious. And then there are the long tongues, the bumblebees which are at a higher risk. They are often dependent on traditional agriculture with grazers, different types of crop fields, and less often mowed. They can pollinate more specialized plants like different types of legumes such as red clover, birdvetch, lungwort, and columbine. With the modernization of our agriculture and farmland, the long-tongued bumblebees are at a risk of extinction. The bumblebees need sufficient floral resources and nesting sites in the agricultural landscape in order to complete their life cycle. The bumblebee life cycle, pollination, and food production are dependent on traditional farm landscapes such as pastures and meadows. In those landscapes, they often find abandoned rodent nests in which they build their nests. Nordic and Baltic countries are mostly covered by forests and mountains. Low amounts of agricultural landscape provides less habitat in general for pollinators. Land fragmentation is caused by large industry areas, highway roads, urban cities, and modern monocrop farmlands, also known as green deserts. These areas with low amounts of food plants are like deserted areas for pollinators. When we build over wooded and meadow areas in order to make room for human expansion, we continually reduce the food and nesting areas for bumblebees and other insects. The increased use in pesticides are also a huge problem for insects, and a lot of pollinating insects become victim to these lethal farmland methods. Pesticides are meant to harm weeds and unwanted pests on farm crops, but unfortunately they do at the same time harm wild bees and bumblebees. Toxins like neonicotinoids, recently one of the most common insecticides in Europe, can lead to dysfunction in basic motor skills in bees, such as flying, walking, and grooming. Research shows that when exposed over a longer time, the toxins affect food consumption and foraging, which ultimately affects the whole colony. This also affects the reproduction of new bumblebee queens. Over time, this will result in less bumblebee nests. Several other countries have started to restrict the use of neonicotinoids, but there are still several other pesticides and insecticides which are harming our pollinating insects. In general, there is still little information on our bumblebees. More monitoring work is needed to gather data. We do, however, see a common pattern between countries, that some species are in fact more exposed than others. In Denmark, 4 species of bumblebees are extinct, while 1 species is close to extinction. Estonia only has 1 species extinct, while long-tongued bumblebee populations are decreasing. 2 species of bumblebees are declining in Finland, but no species have gone extinct yet. Norway has no extinct species out of 35, although one species, Bombus semenivellis, was last sighted once in 2013. In addition, 5 species have declined. In Sweden, 3 species are extinct, and a total of 8 species are declining. Bumblebees, like other pollinating insects, are completely dependent on flowering plants to survive. They collect nectar to feed themselves and the other bumblebees in the nest, and pollen to feed the larvae. Because of this, flowering meadows are highly important for these insects as large sources of food. Traditional meadows were either grazed or mowed every second year. This practice kept the areas open and free from bushes and trees, and flowers would be present during the entire flowering season for pollinators to enjoy. The amount of traditional meadows has decreased tremendously over the last 100 years as a result of the industrialization of agriculture. This has led to very few and highly separated areas for wildflowers to grow, overall reducing the available food for wild pollinators. Some farmers establish flowering fields in order to improve the living conditions for pollinating insects. The flowering zones are usually established by clearing invasive or dominating species and shadowing trees. You must either graze or mow the area in order for native flower species to start growing. You can also sow flower seeds in the area. The flowering strips are usually established on fields by sowing annual flowering species. A bumblebee needs constant supply of nectar. Think of it as a car needing gas. A bumblebee can fly less than an hour before the gas tank is empty and it needs a refill of nectar. These flowering zones are supposed to work as corridors in the landscape in which pollinating insects can find food and refill their nectar tanks. There is huge variance in the Nordic countries on how much traditional semi-natural habitats are left. You can still find summer farms in Norway, but these are also declining in numbers. Sweden has, for a long time, been supporting the management of meadows, and Estonia still has large alvar meadows left. Finland, on the other hand, is only left with a small amount of grazed forest meadows. All of the countries have agri-environmental support for taking care of these areas, but they are difficult to fit into the modern agricultural systems. It's a popular belief that in order to save the bees, we need to increase the number of honeybees. Although this is what is often depicted in the media, honeybees are not a threatened species. They are important pollinators and their honey is loved by many, but an increase in honeybees also means increased competition with wild pollinators over food sources. Studies from Sweden, among others, show that an increase in honeybees in areas with wild bees present will decrease the wild bee population. Honeybees have short tongues and cannot pollinate all types of flowers. Flowers with deep flower tubes need pollinators with long tongues, such as long-tongued bumblebees or other long-tongued pollinators. Some research also suggests that fruits and berries pollinated by wild bees, especially bumblebees, are bigger and in general more successful than those pollinated by honeybees. Bumblebees are specialized in bus pollination, which makes them really unique. This is a method where the bumblebee uses their wing muscles to shake the pollen loose from the plant. They are also native to our colder northern Europe, unlike the modern honeybee that is brought by humans to northern Europe from southern regions. Bumblebees are adapted to our climate conditions, and this is why they can fly and pollinate in colder temperatures than the honeybees. It is important to remember that the modern honeybee breeds are imported livestock, whereas the dark Nordic honeybee and wild bees are native. We need to focus on our wild bees, especially the ones with long tongues. When creating pesticide-free feeding areas for our wild bees, we do also at the same time improve the health of honeybees. There has been an increased focus on both honeybees and wild bees during the past years, but there has not been carried out that many measures for improving their well-being. Norway and Sweden have a pollinator strategy in place, while Denmark and Estonia have strategies specifically for honeybees. Fortunately, there are changes going on. Finland has started working on a national pollinator strategy, and Denmark are planning to do so as well. Such strategies often involve making it easier for farmers and other people to apply for funds directed at measures which can help pollinating insects. Estonia already has a support system in place where farmers can request funding for maintaining foraging areas for honeybees. And Norway have also created flowering opportunities for farmers so they can create and maintain flowering zones or flowering meadows. The Estonian support system is specified for honeybees, but they also support wild pollinators in the framework of common agricultural policy indirectly through different measures and requirements beneficial to the general environment. The measures are trying to maintain landscape diversity, supporting the management of semi-natural habitats and organic farming, increasing the share of legumes in crop rotation, favoring grazing animals, but also reduce the use of pesticides. An important focus has also been to require the farmers, which are applying for funds, to focus on environmentally friendly fruit and berry growing. The applicants must place elements which support biodiversity in their garden, such as insect nests and beehives. Estonia have also introduced a measure of establishing a grassland stripe containing at least 3 plant species, a mix of grasses and other flowering plants. The purpose of this measure is to increase biodiversity in general, functioning as a natural pest control, binding CO2 through the photosynthesis process and contributing to decreasing soil erosion. Based on the bumblebee monitoring in Estonia, it seems that the measure has been helpful for bumblebees. The organization La Humlas Huset has been working with farmers since 2013 and have been running a project to increase the amount of flowering zones since 2017. It is also now possible for farmers to apply for funds in Norway specifically to improve pollinator habitats, as well as support for maintaining semi-natural pastures. Finland and Sweden also have a support system for taking care of semi-natural pastures, but not yet direct support for improving the habitats of bumblebees and other wild pollinators. If you are a farmer, there are certain measures you can do to help our pollinating insects. By not using pesticides, our pollinators can visit flowers without facing the risk of losing basic functions or die because of toxins. A lot of the wild flowers we consider weeds are also a good food source for bumblebees and wild bees. You can improve the living conditions for pollinators a lot by planting different types of flowers on your farmland and in your backyard. You are securing food resources for bees through their entire lifespan, which is typically just the spring, summer, fall season, by choosing different types of flowering plants, which flowers from early spring to the late fall. You are helping the wild bees, who are in desperate need of help, by focusing on choosing plants which are good for long-tongued bees, not just honeybees. You save most of the flowers as food plants for bumblebees when you cut the flowering areas late summer. You should cut approximately 20 centimeters above the soil, as there always will be some flowers left as food plants for the bumblebees. By doing this, the flowering plants will be available for pollinating insects during the whole season, and the plants will produce seeds for the following year. Cutting too low or too early in the season removes important food sources for our insects and can leave them at risk of starvation. For more information on how to help, you can reach out to any of these organizations who do constant work to save our wild pollinators.